She was standing in the bathroom of a hotel in Singapore when she noticed the gray hair. Not the first one. There had been others. But this one caught the light differently, and she pulled it out and held it between her fingers and thought about her mother, who had gone gray at 38. She was 39 now. Outside, the city hummed. She had a keynote speech in 4 hours, 2,000 people, a stage with her name on it. This was what she had wanted. She dropped the hair into the trash and looked at herself in the mirror. Chief Strategy Officer. She had worked 12 years to get those 3 words on her business card. Her phone buzzed. A text from her husband. Hope it goes well. A thumbs up emoji, nothing else. They had been married for 6 years. She tried to remember the last time they had a conversation that wasn't logistical. Who was picking up groceries? Whose turn it was to call the plumber? Somewhere in the architecture of building a life together, they had stopped building toward each other. The speech went well. It always went well. Leadership, innovation, disruption. The words had lost their meaning years ago, but they still worked. People nodded. They took notes. This was networking. This was how you built a career that mattered. She flew home the next day. Her husband picked her up from the airport. He asked how the trip was. She said good. They drove home in silence that felt normal because it was normal. This was what marriage looked like after 6 years. That night she couldn't sleep. She got up and poured a glass of wine and sat on the couch in the dark. The house was clean, minimalist. They had hired a designer to make it look like the houses in magazines. It looked like a house that was staged for sale. She thought about her 20s, the apartment she had shared with 2 roommates, the kitchen table where they would sit for hours, drinking cheap wine, talking about their lives. One of those roommates had gotten married and moved to Portland. The other had a baby and stopped responding to texts. Eventually, the distance turned into silence. Not because anyone was angry, just because lives diverge, because staying close takes effort, and effort takes time, and time was the thing she never had. There was a version of herself from back then who would not recognize the woman sitting on this couch. That version had wanted to be a journalist. She had thought about writing for magazines, stories that mattered. But journalism was dying, and rent was expensive, and when the consulting firm offered her a job with a salary that felt like freedom, she took it, just for a couple of years, just to get stable. 15 years later, she was still getting stable. The consulting firm led to a corporate job. The corporate job led to a promotion. The promotion led to another promotion. Each step made sense in isolation, but when she looked back at the path, she couldn't see the shape of it, just a series of yeses that had added up to a life she didn't remember choosing. She was tired of the meetings, tired of the emails, tired of performing competence in rooms full of people who were also performing competence. Tired of the voice in her head that said, if you just work a little harder, if you just prove yourself one more time, then you'll finally feel like you've made it. Except she had made it. By every external measure, she had made it, and it felt like nothing. There was a woman at work, younger, maybe 28, who reminded her of herself, ambitious, driven, always the first one in and the last one to leave. She watched this woman and wanted to pull her aside and say, stop, say it's not worth it. But she didn't, because saying it out loud would mean admitting it to herself. Her father called on Wednesday. He was 72 now, retired, living in Florida. He asked when she was going to visit. She said soon. She always said soon, but soon kept getting pushed back. There was always another project, another deadline. He didn't push. He just said, okay, let me know. And she sat there holding the phone and felt something like shame, because her father was 72, and she didn't know how many more calls there would be, and she was spending her time in meetings that didn't matter. That weekend, her husband suggested they go out for dinner, just the two of them. She almost said no because she had work to catch up on, but she caught herself and said yes. They went to a restaurant they used to go to when they first started dating, but sitting across from him, she felt like she was looking at a stranger, not because he had changed, because she had. He asked if she was happy. The question caught her off guard. She said, of course, why wouldn't I be? He shrugged. You just seem somewhere else lately. I'm here, she said, but she wasn't. She was thinking about the presentation she had to give on Tuesday. She was thinking about the email she forgot to send. I'm here, she said again, and this time it sounded like an apology. She turned 40 in November. There was a small party. Her husband made a toast. People laughed. She blew out candles on a cake she didn't want. Later, she stood in the kitchen loading the dishwasher and thought about the fact that 40 felt the same as 39, the same as 30, like she had been the same person her entire adult life, just wearing different clothes, carrying different titles. But underneath it all, the same fear, the same need to prove something she couldn't name. Her mother had died at 63, sudden, a stroke. She had been planning to retire the following year, planning to travel, planning to do all the things she had been putting off, and then she ran out of time. She thought about dying at 63. That would give her 23 more years, 23 years to keep doing what she was doing, to keep climbing, to keep missing the point. Because the point wasn't the career, the point wasn't the title or the salary, the point was supposed to be the life, the moments, the people. But she had traded all of that for the appearance of success. She started therapy in December. The therapist asked what brought her in. She said she didn't know. She said she was successful. She had a good job, a good marriage, a good life. But something felt off, like she was living someone else's story. The therapist asked whose story it was. She didn't have an answer. They met every week, and slowly the therapist started asking the questions she had been avoiding. What do you want? Not what you think you should want. What do you actually want? And she realized she didn't know. She had spent so many years becoming the person she thought she needed to be that she had lost track of who she actually was. She thought about quitting. What would happen if she just stopped, if she walked away from the job and the title? What would be left? The thought terrified her, because the answer might be nothing. But the thought also felt like relief. In January, she took a week off. No work, no laptop, just time. She wanted to see what it felt like to just be in her own life without an agenda. The first 2 days were hard, but by the third day, something shifted. She stopped trying to fill the time. She sat in the backyard and watched birds. She read a book that wasn't about business. She cooked a meal that took 3 hours. And she felt something she hadn't felt in years, presence. The sense of being here in this moment, not planning for the next one. Her husband noticed. He said, you seem different, lighter. But it wasn't tiredness. It was the absence of striving. It was what it felt like to stop running. She went back to work the following week, but something had cracked. She couldn't unsee it now. The pointlessness, the way everyone was pretending this mattered. The way she had spent 15 years building a career that had built nothing except a list of accomplishments that would be forgotten the moment she left. She started saying no, not to everything, but to things that didn't feel essential. And people noticed. Her boss asked if everything was okay. She said yes, but she could tell he didn't believe her. In March, she handed in her resignation. She didn't have another job lined up. She didn't have a plan. She just knew she couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep trading her life for a paycheck and calling it success. People were confused. They asked what she was going to do. She said she didn't know. They said, "You're walking away from everything you've built." She said, "I know," because that was the point. She had built something, but it was the wrong thing. The first month was disorienting. She didn't know who she was without the job. But slowly, she started to remember. She started writing again, not for anyone, just for herself. She visited her father in Florida, stayed for a week. They played golf and watched old movies and talked about nothing important. And it was the most important week she'd had in years. Her marriage didn't survive, not because of anger, just because they had built a partnership around ambition, and when the ambition disappeared, there was nothing left. They separated quietly, and she felt sad, but she also felt free. She moved into a small apartment, 1 bedroom, just her and her books, and the sound of the city outside. And for the first time in years, it felt like home. She didn't know what came next. Maybe she would write, maybe she would teach, but for now, she was just here, in her life, not running from it. She thought about the gray hair sometimes, the one she had pulled out in that hotel bathroom, but now she let the gray grow. She stopped dyeing it, because it wasn't evidence of failure. It was just evidence of time, and time was the thing she had been wasting, trying to outrun death by staying busy. But you can't outrun it. All you can do is be here, present, alive, while you still are. She sat on her balcony one evening in late April and watched the sun go down and thought about the woman she used to be, the one who gave keynote speeches, the one who had the title and the salary and the proof. And she didn't miss her, because that woman had spent her whole life becoming someone, and in the process, she forgot to be anyone at all.